From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The U.S. government announces a breakthrough on nuclear fusion, but does this change anything about the climate debate we're having today? Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We are joined today by my colleagues, columnists Alicia Finley and Kim Strassel. Welcome to you both. The news on Tuesday was that U.S. scientists had performed the first controlled nuclear fusion experiment that generated more energy out of the experiment than was put into the experiment. Let's start with a clip of Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm explaining why this matters to science and maybe eventually to the climate and to energy.
What does this accomplishment do? Two things. First, it strengthens our national security because it opens a new realm for maintaining a safe, secure, and effective nuclear deterrent in an age where we do not have nuclear testing. Ignition allows us to replicate, for the first time, certain conditions that are found only in the stars and the sun. And the second thing it does, of course, is that this milestone moves us one significant step closer to the possibility of zero carbon, abundant fusion energy powering our society.
Alicia, what do you make of this, the Biden administration's response to this scientific triumph and some of the public reaction?
Well, I think what's garnered most of the attention, at least in terms of the media, has been the potential to use fusion technology as a way to get to net zero out our emissions. The way fusion works is a little different than nuclear fission, which is what powers most of our nuclear plants today, is it actually combines atoms rather than splitting them. Scientists have been working on this for decades, and mainly actually for military and defense purposes. But there is also the potential, if you could kind of scale the technology, and you still need more technological breakthroughs than what we achieved the other day, to use this to produce electricity. The problem here right now is with the experiment that resulted in this breakthrough. It produced a net gain of energy. But the problem is the lasers that were used actually to produce this energy actually required nearly 100 times more than was actually produced in the reaction. So the lasers need to become more efficient. We need to be able to scale this technology. Right now, like the facility that was used actually would take up a whole football stadium. And so we still need actually more breakthroughs technologically to get to this point where we can use it for energy. But right now there are military and defense applications, and I think that's in itself is a reason to be very excited.
The Journal's editorial on this has some figures. It says that the reaction released 3.15 megajoules of energy for every 2.05 megajoules of input. But to the point Alicia is making, the lasers are 1% efficient and required about 300 megajoules to put that energy into the experiment. And so we're still a long way from generating energy from this, which is a broader claim than just net energy out of the experiment. But to the point about the hype, Kim, I think there has been some remarkable media coverage of this. Here's one headline: Can fusion solve the climate crisis? And that raises, in at least my mind, an old joke in journalism, which is that if the headline is a question, the answer is always no, or at least often no. Here's another one: Fusion breakthrough is a milestone for climate clean energy. And here's another one: Nuclear fusion. How long until this breakthrough discovery can power your house? And you have to read to the very bottom of that last story to get the answer, which is a expert saying maybe 20 or 30 years from now. And so I'm not trying to play down the significance of the scientific breakthrough here. And maybe fusion one day can power your house. I mean, hydrogen is the most abundant material in the universe. And unlike with nuclear fission, where you're splitting uranium, you don't end up with any radioactive waste product at the end. And so I can dream the fusion dream as well as anybody else. But Kim, it seems to me that this changes nothing about our current debate about climate and our current questions about energy and whether we have enough natural gas, whether our allies in Europe have enough natural gas to get through this winter without freezing.
Yeah. Some of us are actually old enough to remember reading those headlines in the past. I think as long as I've been alive, I've been reading headlines about how we're just about there on nuclear fusion and this is all going to be great. Look, I think we should celebrate this, okay? Just overall, I think technological and scientific breakthroughs are exciting. And actually, the whole story of this is really kind of fun in that, this has been on the radar screen since the 1960s. It really got turbocharged in 1997 at the Lawrence Livermore Lab. They set up a national ignition facility to work on this. And it was so badly managed for so long that it was nearly shut down. And then the Department of Energy decided to step back, look at it in a different way, bring in different interdisciplinary teams of scientists, and be a little bit more focused. And they managed to make it work. And so, this is kind of a more than 50-year ambition that has finally been realized. And I think that is something that America should be very, very proud of. Yes, all the headlines about its commercial potential are very overhyped. This is a very important step, but there are giant steps that would need to be taken to get it so that it was out there accomplishing any of the things that newspapers are now talking about. And yeah, there's all kinds of wonderful reasons why we would like to see that future. One other aspect of this is that hydrogen, which is the atoms that are used here, are incredibly abundant and no one dominates that field. As you said, there's no nuclear waste, there's no CO2 if you can make this work. One question that I have now is, having created this breakthrough, if whether the scientific community that engage in this is now going to share some of that knowledge and let our entrepreneurs and business sector do what they do really well, which is moving from basic science to applied science and figuring out how to speed up the process of making this actually useful. And that'll be interesting to me to see. In times past, when the U.S. government has done that, we've progressed a lot faster than in times which unfortunately are more common when they sit on this information and guard it very jealously.
Kim, your point about remembering headlines like this in the past inspired me to do a quick Google while you were talking there. Here's a 1991 headline in the New York Times: "Breakthrough in nuclear fusion offers hope for power of future." After nearly a half century of effort and many billions of dollars, scientists for the first time have produced a significant amount of power from controlled nuclear fusion. The achievement is a major step in harnessing for constructive human use the kind of thermonuclear fire that lights the sun. And that is very, very similar to the news coverage that we are seeing this week. Alicia, on the point about the research, that I think is a more interesting short-term political conversation. And the Journal has an op-ed from a couple governors of the Livermore National Laboratory, including Stephen Koonin, who has written a recent book about climate change that people might have heard of. And they describe the process of this research. They say that it started in 1997, that there were some hangups, and after failed attempts to achieve ignition of the fusion program, they got close to canceling it in 2012. They persisted, and now here we are a decade later, and they've got the fusion experiment to ignite. And so they explain this as an example of U.S. persistence, U.S. leadership. They say the U.S. now leads every other country by a decade because of its foresight, perseverance, and research enterprise. Continued investment in laser fusion will ensure that this leadership endures. And so, Alicia, I wonder how you think about this question of government research dollars and where they ought to be going and whether they're going to the right places right now.
So my view of this is that I think the proper role of government is to fund basic research, the kind that produced this breakthrough discovery, and which also helped produce mRNA vaccines. Over the years, this is, again, basic research that private companies, for the most part, don't have an incentive to do for themselves. The private companies are the ones that basically take these discoveries out of the lab into the markets. They scale them, they produce new innovations off them, but basic research is essentially the role of government. But the problem is increasingly is that the government is trying to fund private companies to do essentially applied research, applying these kinds of the discoveries from basic research, commercializing them. And I think case in point is a lot of the green technology subsidies. I mean, we see this in China too. And what we found is that this model of industrial policy in which the government funds, or tries to pick winners and losers and thinks that this technology or that technology is better, this kind of lithium ion battery, is better than another one that is being developed by a company. It doesn't work really well. There was a study in the National Bureau of Economic Research that found that China's industrial policy and policy of trying to pick winners and losers actually reduces productivity. And in many cases, in most cases, it actually doesn't pick the winners. And the concern is that the US is now starting to tilt toward China and how it funds science and is trying to lean toward funding more applied research rather than basic research. And also just fund companies like we saw with the semiconductor bill that was doled out some $50 billion in subsidies to chip manufacturers. The Inflation Reduction Act was just rife with these kinds of subsidies. The government puts its thumb on the scale and tries to pick which company or which technology it thinks that should be developed and should be expanded. And I think that's overall a losing strategy for the US economically.